Fire and Rescue Services Service Delivery Review following the public consultation, which closed on 17 September 2025.
Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Fire Rescue Service received over 3,500 responses to its review consultation and held over 40 public meetings. The review is in reaction to the changing nature of emergencies that Scottish Fire Rescue Service responds to. For example, dwelling fires, as I've already noted, have been reduced by 20% since 2013, and incidents such as flooding and wildfires have increased significantly. Therefore, it is right for Scottish Fire Rescue Service to carefully consider how to adapt to the changing risks to remain effective and efficient with firefighters in the right place and at the right time.
Annabel Ewing.
I thank the Minister for her answer. In fact, the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service have refused to confirm that in the event of overwhelming support from local consultation responses for retention of 2 appliances at Lochgelly Fire Station, they will act accordingly and keep both appliances. Can the Minister therefore, for the benefit of my constituents and the Chamber, clarify what the purpose of the consultation is, as surely such equivocation risks the entire process being viewed simply as a sham?
Minister.
Thank you. As I have said before, I believe that it is for the Chief Fire Officer and his commanders across the service to make the decisions that are for the best for the service, protecting communities across the country and respond to the changing natures of risk. This is not a decision for the Scottish Government, and it is appropriate that decisions on the fire appliances are best placed in a matter for them. And as I've outlined, there is an independent analysis going on into the responses to the consultation that will inform the Scottish Fire Rescue Service's final decisions. And any changes that they introduce will be over the next 5 years. I meet frequently with Scottish Fire Rescue Service, and they have confirmed to me that no decisions have been made.
Supplementary, Sharon Dowie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Fire and Rescue Service's own consultation proposes closing 8 fire stations and changing several others from 24-hour whole-time cover to day shift only. The Minister says that will put officers at the right place at the right time. But given that the service's median emergency response time is the slowest in more than a decade, how does the Government expect these changes to improve response times or enhance public safety?
Minister.
Thank you. Just to, firstly, regarding the response time that the member brings up, Scottish Fire Rescue do continue to respond to every emergency incident with the appropriate level of resources. Now, they have a targeted approach to risk and allocation of resources overtook the focus given to response times some years ago, and we have seen an increase in response times across the whole of the UK. Now, the safety of our firefighters is of utmost importance, and Scottish Fire Rescue Service have a strict health and safety policies in place which have evolved over the years. For example, changes to operational procedures to stop firefighters travelling under blue light conditions whilst putting on PPE equipment have added to the response times in recent years, and this is an essential change to protect firefighter safety.
Thank you. Question number 4, Alec Rowley.
Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what action it's taking to address reported rises in waiting times for social care assessments and packages in Fife.
Minister Tom Arthur.
The Scottish Government acknowledges there is a reported rise in waiting times for social care assessments. The Scottish Government has protected and prioritised additional investment into social care, despite an extremely challenging budget settlement. This includes almost £2.2 billion for social care and integration, exceeding our commitment to increase funding by almost £350 million. Under the Social Work Scotland Act 1968, local authorities and health and social care partnerships have a duty to assess the social care support needs of people, giving due consideration to those assessments to arrange suitable and timely services when required.
Alec Crowley.
Presiding Officer, in Fife there has been a steady increase in terms of assessments over the last year, a 60% increase in the numbers of people waiting. In terms of the number of people who have been assessed and then needing a care package, that has increased over the last year by 127%. Now, we talk about percentages, but these are real people. Does the Minister firstly accept that unless we tackle this, then we're not going to tackle the massive problems within our hospitals and acute care? And secondly, will the Minister agree to have a look specifically at Fife, given that these sustained increases are causing major problems for elderly and vulnerable across Fife?
Minister.
Well, look, can I thank Alex Rowley for the typically constructive spirit in which he raises the issue, and I can actually inform him I met with senior leadership at Fife Health and Social Care Partnership yesterday, and I will be following that up. And I would want to recognise some of the excellent and innovative work that is taking place in Fife. And then give him the assurance that the Government absolutely recognises the importance of timely assessment and delivery of social care packages, including how that relates to the wider pressures that we face across health and social care. There is a significant amount of work that has been undertaken collaboratively. That is led by the Cabinet Secretary for Health, and we continue to engage closely. I will be following up an engagement with Fife, and I'd be more than happy to keep the member informed of any developments.
Question number 5, Neil Bibby.
To ask the Scottish Government when it last met NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde and what issues were discussed.
Cabinet Secretary Neil Gray.
Presiding Officer, both Ministers and Scottish Government officials regularly meet with representatives of all NHS boards, including NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, to discuss matters of importance to local people. My most recent engagement with the Chief Executive of NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde was on Tuesday at Bute House, where we discussed, amongst other things, the fact that Scotland has falling waiting times, reduced waiting lists and higher planned care activity.
Neil Bibby.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. The Scottish Government is well aware of the concerns that Unison reps and I have about the impact of the looming closure of Ward 36 at the RAH for vulnerable older adults. With winter coming up, now is clearly not the time to be cutting beds. In fact, I'm told that Scottish Government money for winter pressures has actually been used to accommodate vulnerable adults in other parts of the hospital, where Ward 36 admissions are limited. This is exactly what staff at the RAH warned would happen, and it's coming to pass despite a petition with over 7,000 signatures. First, this SNP government came for the children's ward at the RAH and closed that. Are they now going to let this ward close for our older folk too and ignore the views of hard-working NHS staff and patients yet again?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I remain of the view that such changes should be carefully considered and decided locally, consistent with national policy, and whilst being meaningfully informed by the views of local stakeholders, including staff and patients. As I said when I previously met and have corresponded with Mr Bibby and Unison on this matter, NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde has been clear that these changes are about providing appropriate, high-quality, safe and sustainable services for older adults in Renfrewshire. Ward 36 has for some time been used for patients awaiting home care or care home placement who are otherwise medically fit for discharge. In line with national policy on shifting the balance of care and minimising delayed discharge, the Health Board has been directing these resources to support local hospital-at-home services.
Question number 6, Michelle Thompson.
To ask the Scottish Government, in light of reported concerns raised by the Scottish Music Industry Association about delays to and sufficiency of funding awards, how it will ensure that the additional £20 million allocated to Creative Scotland for its multi-year funding programme in 25-26 effectively supports a growing number of music-specific organisations.
Cabinet Secretary Angus Robertson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government has increased Creative Scotland's multi-year funding by £20 million this year, providing a major boost to Scotland's culture sector, and this investment provides stability for organisations to plan and to deliver high-quality programmes in theatre, in visual arts, in literature and music. 46 music organisations now receive multi-year support, which is more than double the previous number, with potentially 3 more in development for 26-27. Many multidisciplinary groups also include music, further strengthening the impact.
Michelle Thompson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response, but I note in the recent independent review of Creative Scotland, UK Music highlighted Scotland's music sector generates over £857 million and sustains over 7,000 jobs. Yet they stress that funding volatility threatens grassroots talent, touring and economic sustainability. Now, I appreciate and understand budgetary pressures, but how will the Cabinet Secretary ensure that Creative Scotland delivers strategic, predictable and resilient investment, particularly for emerging artists, self-releasing labels and rural organisations through 25-26 and beyond?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think the good news for Michelle Thompson and indeed the sector is because of the introduction of multi-annual year funding, that sees an end of the volatility that many organisations previously had to put up with. No other part of the United Kingdom has multi-annual year funding in the way that this government has introduced for the Scottish culture sector, which has such an important impact in the music sector itself. If there are any specific examples that she has of funding volatility at the present time, I'd be grateful if she would let me know. The new system has been introduced, so that is not the case.
Question number 7, George Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it is supporting local cultural activities and festivals to encourage economic development and tourism.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government is investing additional £34 million in Scotland's culture sector this year, moving us closer to the First Minister's pledge to invest at least £100 million more annually by 28-29. The uplift strengthens Creative Scotland's multi-year funding programme, supporting 251 organisations across 27 local authority areas, and expands flagship initiatives such as the Culture Collective and Creative Communities Scotland. These investments boost participation, support jobs and drive cultural and economic growth nationwide. And Visit Scotland's latest survey shows history and culture are one of the biggest attractions for visitors, helping secure Scotland's place as a world-class cultural destination.
George Adam.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer. The Cabinet Secretary will be aware that over the past weekend, Paisley had its annual Halloween Festival, which is the largest of its kind in Scotland, ensuring that thousands of buddies were in the Paisley Town Centre on Friday and Saturday night. During the same weekend, Paisley also received the award of Scotland's Town of the Year. Is Paisley leading the way as a perfect example of cultural investment as an important part of town centre regeneration?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful for Mr Adam highlighting the range of interventions and events that are taking place in Paisley. And I think he underlines the fact that this government is committed to supporting cultural and arts events right across Scotland. Paisley is a really important part of Scotland's cultural landscape, and I'm very grateful for him highlighting the many great events that take place there.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions. And at question number 1, I call Russell Finlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Claire Ingalls was a loving and happy young mum who was tortured and murdered by a man who she had just begun a relationship with. The judge described Claire's murder as, quote, beyond sadistic. The serial criminal who killed her had 40 convictions and was a known danger to women and children. Yet, he was repeatedly bailed to the home that Claire shared with her young son. Claire's parents, Fiona and Ian, have spent 4 years fighting and indeed pleading for information, and they're here today. It's their 3rd time coming to the public gallery during FMQs. Does John Swinney agree that no family should be forced into the media glare and onto the political stage to get answers from Scotland's justice system?
First Minister.
First of all, Presiding Officer, let me say that Mr Finlay has raised the case, the tragic case of Claire Ingalls with me before, and I have had the pleasure, thanks to the assistance of Mr Finlay's staff, of being able to meet with Mr and Mrs Ingalls on their previous visit to Parliament. And I can extend my sympathy to Mr and Mrs Ingalls about the tragedy that they have experienced. I agree with Mr Finlay that no family should have to suffer as Mr and Mrs Ingalls have suffered. The issues in connection with the handling of the case that surrounded the perpetrator of the murder of Claire Ingalls are being explored by the Crown, and the Lord Advocate has taken the independent decisions that she has taken on this matter.
Russell Finlay.
Thank you. Ian and Fiona are here out of devotion to their daughter and a determination to force the full truth from the authorities. And as a result of their pressure, the Crown Office instructed a social work expert to investigate the circumstances of Claire's murder. And the expert's report is truly damning. It says that Claire and her son were, and I quote, invisible in the system. and the repeated granting of bail to Clare's home was, quote, a major safeguarding lapse. Now, the Crown asked the expert to establish if system defects caused or contributed to Clare's murder, but Fiona and Ian have not been told the answer to this critical question, and that's because the Crown only gave them a brief summary of the report. So will John Swinney back the full release of this report?
First Minister.
President Officer, there will be issues that will be applied in relation to the release of the full report, which I am not cited on today. What I will say to Mr Finlay is that the Lord Advocate has brought to Government in her period of office since 2021 an intense focus on the awful experience of victims in our criminal justice system, and indeed I would pay tribute to the Lord Advocate for the work that she has undertaken to bring the perpetrators of heinous crimes to justice. Therefore, I will ask the Lord Advocate if there can be further dialogue with Mr and Mrs Ingalls on the contents of the report to ensure that the issues about which they remain concerned can be properly and fully aired. There may well be issues about data handling with which Mr Finlay will be familiar that cause constraints on the release of the full report, if the report can be released, I'm very happy for that to be the case, but there may well be reasons why it can't be the case. But what I will do is I will ask the Lord Advocate to engage further with Mr and Mrs Ingalls to ensure that they can have a fuller understanding to try to help them come to terms with the tragic loss that they have suffered.
Russell Finlay.
I agree that the Lord Advocate's focus is sincere and welcome, but the way in which the Ingalls family are being treated is cruel and disrespectful. In 2022, Stirling Council held a serious incident review of Clare's murder, which concluded that a full review wasn't needed. The expert disagrees, saying, quote, a comprehensive review was absolutely necessary. But to the astonishment of Fiona and Ian, the Crown Office say they've still not decided whether their daughter's murder merits a fatal accident inquiry. Fiona told me, when we came here last year, we looked John Swinney in the eye and took him at his word that our questions would be answered, but we're still being kept in the dark. So will John Swinney back their calls for a fatal accident inquiry?
First Minister.
I'm trying to be as helpful as I can here. I hope Mr Finlay understands the sincerity of my engagement on this issue, but the calling of a fatal accident inquiry is a matter for the Lord Advocate independently, and I have to, as First Minister, I understand Mr Finlay is able to call for such issues. As First Minister, I have to respect the independence of the Lord Advocate for me to act, otherwise would contravene my oath of office, and I won't do that. What I will say is that I think the process of investigation that was originally conceived of in Stirling Council was not acceptable. It was not good enough, which is why I asked the Crown to look at this again and why Mr Finlay has in his possession the report that he has, because that was at my instigation that I judged the initial inquiries were totally unsatisfactory. Now, there is a matter of consideration as to whether a fatal accident inquiry would shed any more light on the issue than the exercise that Mr Finlay has. So that's a matter of further consideration. But what I will say is that I will raise these issues directly with the Lord Advocate and ask her for her consideration of these matters to ensure that Mr and Mrs Ingalls can have as much support as possible to come to terms with the loss that they have suffered.
Russell Finlay.
Well, another reason that an FAI is absolutely critical is that the Crown's report reveals a major flaw at the heart of Scotland's bail system. It says, and I quote, that social workers are not obligated to verify bail addresses, which explains why a violent criminal and no danger to women and children was repeatedly bailed to Clare's home address. Now, the report describes this as a systemic flaw. My party has published a paper today setting out changes that are needed to fix Scotland's justice system and to put victims first. Now, Fiona and Ian have urged the Government to back this specific change so that courts must check the veracity of addresses and that they are safe. They say that this could prevent another family from suffering such a tragedy. So will John Swinney commit to urgently ending this bail blind spot that is putting women and children in danger?
First Minister.
President, I'm familiar with the points that Mr Finlay has raised this morning, and as always, on these issues in relation to the criminal justice system, we will give them consideration. What I would say, which I hope provides some degree of reassurance, is that in the recent legislation that Parliament has approved, the single bail test makes clear that the court should specifically consider the protection of the victim from a risk of both physical and psychological harm before making the decision on bail. Now, in my view, that would provide the type of protection that Mr Finlay is looking for, and it is already in statute. I appreciate that is of absolutely no comfort to Mr and Mrs Ingalls in the loss that they have suffered. But what I do hope it reassures members of the public about is that the government is taking action to ensure that the type of experience that Mr and Mrs Ingalls have faced we will be mitigating about that in the future because of the steps that we've taken to change the law. But I will, of course, give consideration to the points that Mr Finlay has raised this morning. And, of course, as always, I'll be happy to see Mr and Mrs Ingalls if that would be of any assistance to them.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. John Swinney and the SNP are failing to keep Scots safe. On John Swinney's watch, our justice system is in crisis, as Scots are paying the price of SNP incompetence. This week, Scottish Labour revealed that there are 10,000 outstanding warrants for arrest in Scotland. This includes 7 warrants for murder, 5 for attempted murder, 40 for rape, 1,253 for assault, 72 for domestic violence and 605 for drug charges. Potential murderers, rapists and drug dealers on our streets. With 10,000 outstanding warrants in Scotland and prison numbers outstripping capacity by several hundreds, can I ask John Swinney, apart from letting criminals out early or not arresting them at all, what will he do to tackle this crisis?
First Minister.
The first thing I'd say to put some context around about what Mr Sarwar is raising is that Scotland is a safer place since this government took office. Recorded crime remains below the position immediately prior to the pandemic in 2019-2020 and is down 39% since 2006-07 when this government came to office. Now, I acknowledge that at any moment in time there will be outstanding arrest warrants, and that is the execution of warrants is an operational matter for Police Scotland, and they remain focused on the investigation of crime and of keeping communities safe. Police numbers are well supported in the country. The latest official statistics show there were 16,427 police officers as at the 30th of June 2025, and there remains a healthy recruitment pipeline for police officers in Scotland today. The Government is, of course, taking action to address the size of the prison population, but there are significant constraints in relation to the proposals the Government puts forward as to which prisoners can be considered eligible for early release, and those standards will be rigorously applied in all that the Government takes forward.
Anna Sarwar.
That is a woeful answer to the fact that there are 10,000 outstanding arrest warrants in Scotland. John Swinney is unable to admit his government's failure, but if he won't listen to me, maybe he will listen to people working on the front line. Just yesterday, the Prison Officers Association published a report saying that our prisons are at crisis point, with serious overcrowding and understaffing, increased levels of violence, widespread drug misuse and self-harm, and plummeting staff morale. But, Presiding Officer, unbelievably, his Justice Secretary yesterday said that the SNP will not build any more prisons, as in her words, if we build them, they will come. If we build them, they will come. So Angela Constance thinks having more prison places encourages crime, but letting criminals out early discourages crime. That might be one of the most incoherent and stupidest things I've ever heard in my life. What are they going to claim next? What are they going to claim next? That building more hospitals will somehow make people more ill in Scotland? So who does John Swinney agree with? Angela Constance or prison officers?
First Minister.
One of the many flaws in Mr Sarwar's argument that he's just put to me is that in relation to the proposals that the Government is currently implementing to build His Majesty's Prison Glasgow will be to a design capacity of 1,344 prisoners, which will add 357 places to the overall prison estate. So that just debunks the nonsense that Mr Sarwar has just put to me in his diatribe. There is a serious issue here that Parliament has to address, and the serious issue is this. Because of the successful prosecution of people who have committed serious crimes, many of them historic in our society, is that people are serving longer sentences. So therefore, there are more long-term prisoners in our prison estate. Of the 8,000 or so prisoners who are currently in our prison estate, 2,000 of them are there on remand. So a proportion of those prisoners will not end up in the system on a long-term basis. And therefore, there are judgments to be made by the criminal justice system independently about the issues in relation to whether individuals should be on remand. And the other issue is about short-term sentences. Now, there have been umpteen reports. Indeed, there was a report which I think has been welcomed warmly by the United Kingdom government, Mr Sarwar's colleagues, produced by David Gauck, who was a very imaginative Justice Secretary in the Conservative government. But Mr Gauck's report indicates the very real issues that have got to be considered about short-term prison sentences. So there is a real debate that's got to be had here in Parliament, which my Justice Secretary is openly undertaking with Parliament, with numerous statements to Parliament and a comprehensive committee appearance yesterday, about the appropriateness of prison in all circumstances for all prisoners. Now, I don't want my comments to be misunderstood. When it comes to people who've committed heinous crimes and they are sentenced to long-term imprisonment, they should serve that. But there are debates that have to be had about the appropriateness of prison in all circumstances because of the pressures on the prison estate. There have to be appropriate disposals for individuals. Community justice authorities, which the Government has substantially increased funding for, have a role to play. And all of those factors are relevant in having a rational debate about the prison population. And I hope Mr Sarwar is able to contribute to that.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, John Swinney and the SNP have been in charge of the justice system for 18 years. Nobody else. And the entire justice system on their watch is in chaos. And all the SNP has to offer is bizarre comments and rank incompetence. And it proves that we can't risk a third decade of this incompetent SNP government. We face rising levels of violent crime, effective legalisation.
Let's hear Mr Sarwar. Thank you. Let's hear Mr Sarwar.
They don't want to hear it, Presiding Officer, because it's their record. We face rising levels of violent crime, effective legalisation of shoplifting and 10,000 outstanding arrest warrants. But what does the SNP do in response? It bills the taxpayer £1 billion for a prison that was supposed to cost £100 million. It allows hundreds of drug dealers to walk free. It cuts police numbers. It closes police stations across Scotland. It lets criminals out early, and it pushes our prisons to breaking point. So when will John Swinney finally admit that his record and the SNP record on justice is nothing short of criminal?
First Minister.
My government, so Mr Sarwar said that everything to date is the responsibility of my government, so I accept that responsibility. I'm a First Minister that stands here every week and takes responsibility. I don't dodge it for a moment. Well, let's hear. We've listened to Mr Sarwar's explanation. On this government's watch, the latest figures for 23-24 show recorded crime is at one of the lowest levels seen since 1974 and down 39% since 2006-07. Police numbers higher than when this government came to office. Recorded crime at the lowest levels.
First Minister, sorry, just a moment. I'd just like to point out that those who are attending in the gallery today do wish to hear all questions and contributions. First Minister.
And I would just point out to members of the public in the gallery and members of the public watching at home that in all that diatribe, 6 months before an election, there wasn't a single solution from Mr Sarwar to the issues that we face. And also, when it comes to putting his finger on the button to vote for a budget that would provide for police numbers, or provide for prison officers, or provide for prisons, Mr Sarwar doesn't vote for the government's provisions. This is just rhetoric and hypocrisy, and I'm proud to defend a record that's one of the lowest levels of crime since 1974, and I'll set that out to the people of Scotland.
Thank you. Question number 3, Ross Greer.
Thank you. Scotland is a monumentally unequal country. There are a small number of people sitting on more wealth than they could spend in 1,000 lifetimes. There are about 420 people who own almost half of our private land. But this morning, thousands of children will have gone to school hungry because of poverty. The Scottish Government's own recent report showed that the top 2% have more than half, the same amount of wealth as more than half the population combined. This month, SNP members instructed their leadership to begin discussions with the UK Government about wealth taxes. But Scottish Government ministers have repeatedly rejected opportunities to tax wealth with the powers that they already have. They've rejected proposals to end tax breaks for big landowners. They rejected proposals to end the King's personal tax exemptions. They rejected proposals to introduce a mansion tax. It's like they're just hoping that the public won't notice that when push comes to shove, this is a government that does not want to risk upsetting the rich and powerful. So can the First Minister name one proposal that he will bring forward before the election to tax wealth in Scotland?
First Minister.
Mr Greer will know from his detailed experience of engaging with the government that we set out our tax proposals in relation to the budget, and that's exactly what the government will do, and will give every consideration to these questions. I am absolutely one with Mr Greer about his concern about inequality in this country. That's why my government is driven by the determination to eradicate child poverty, in which, as a consequence of the tax decisions that we have made, we are making progress in being the only part of the United Kingdom to have a falling level of child poverty when it is projected to rise in every other part of the United Kingdom. And then, in relation to some of the suggestions that Mr Greer has made, as he knows from his previous engagement, indeed I have personally been engaged in some of these questions, we have explored some of the practical aspects of the proposals that he has put to us, and we haven't been able to find a pathway through that would work effectively without consequences that would be damaging to the policy intention. We have, of course, used land and buildings transaction tax, for example, to weight tax charges to the higher end of the income spectrum, and, of course, as I say, we'll consider these issues in relation to the formulation of the government's budget.
Ross Greer.
Thank you. I look forward to discussions with the First Minister about the budget because, as he mentioned, we do have options here. I would say to him that the reason the government couldn't agree to remove the King's personal tax exemption had nothing to do with practical difficulties, and I think we can all understand why the government didn't support that. But there are options here. Land and buildings transaction tax that he mentioned, non-domestic rates, council tax, these are all wealth taxes, and they're all entirely within the Scottish Government's control. The largest single form of wealth in Scotland is property, and property wealth has surged by almost £100 billion in the last decade. But council tax is still stuck in 1990, where the poorest pay more than they should and the wealthiest get off with an absolute steal. And in turn, our local services are at breaking point. Families can't get social care packages for elderly relatives. Children with additional needs go without the support they need at school because the staff just aren't there. Community centres and libraries have closed. This government is promised to scrap the council tax 18 years ago, and this week they launched another consultation. The First Minister knows this farce can't continue, so will he commit today that whichever options find the most support through this consultation, the Scottish Government will bring forward a bill to reform or replace the council tax after the election?
First Minister.
President Officer, what I'd say to Mr Greer, is that obviously in relation to the council tax, the government has brought forward and consulted on proposals about replacing the council tax when we put that to the public as a prospect in 2007, and we were unable to command a parliamentary majority on these questions. So that's why we've taken the steps which we are trying to take with other parties to create a broader political consensus in favour of council tax reform, and we will endeavour to do that. What I would say also to Mr Greer is that in relation to the last budget, for which we were appreciative of the support of the Green Party, we were able to deliver a much better settlement to local government, which improved on the financing of local government. So I pay tribute to Green colleagues and Liberal Democrat colleagues for voting for the budget, unlike everybody else in here, who were not interested in giving a better settlement to local government, but at least the Greens and the Liberal Democrats and the SNP were. So we will continue to engage constructively to support local services, because I share Mr Greer's view that we rely upon local services to support the population in Scotland.
Question number 4, Emma Harper.
Thank you, President Officer. To ask the First Minister whether the Scottish Government has had any initial response from the UK Government in relation to the letter sent to the Minister of State for Food Security and Rural Affairs on the 22nd of October regarding the Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund. First Minister.
President Officer, we have had no reply to that letter. Scotland previously received 46% of the UK's EU fisheries funding allocation, compared to just 7.78% from the new UK fund, which spreads over 12 years with no guarantees beyond the current UK Parliament. We are told that the UK fund is specifically aimed at revitalising the fishing sector, so allocations should reflect the relative size and importance of Scotland's fishing sector. Scottish industry leaders have urged UK ministers to reconvene a meeting of the Scottish Seafood Industry Action Group to discuss this issue, and we plan to support that call in writing.
Harper. Thank the First Minister for that response. The recent funding announcement is yet another example of UK Government that does not understand or indeed care about our fishing and coastal communities. Fishing is a hugely important contributor to the local economy in the south-west of Scotland, including in Kirkcudbright for landing and processing. And given this and the range of pressures facing the sector, from proposed cuts to quotas to dealing with the ongoing impacts of Brexit, does the First Minister agree with me that this deal, which is an insult and betrayal to Scotland and our fishing sector, cannot stand and must be reconsidered? What further steps will the Scottish Government take to protect and support the Scottish fishing sector?
First Minister.
I think I agree very much with Emma Harper's point, and I think I should reiterate to Parliament that previously Scotland received 46% of the UK's EU fisheries funding allocation, and that's now gone down to 7.78%, despite the fact that the overwhelming majority of fish in the United Kingdom are landed here in Scotland. So this is just completely and utterly inequitable. I saw one of my parliamentary colleagues in the House of Commons asking if the Secretary of State for Scotland had made any representations to ministers about this point, and no answer was forthcoming. So it would be interesting to know if the Secretary of State for Scotland actually bothered to stand up for Scotland, or whether it's just another example of the UK Government taking a decision which is prejudicial to Scotland. And I assure Emma Harper and colleagues representing constituencies with a fishing interest that we will do everything we can to get a different outcome for Scotland.
Beatrice Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. 9% of the value of fish landed in the UK comes through Shetland ports. What percentage of the Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund can Shetland expect to receive via the Scottish Government? First Minister.
Well, actually, the point Beatrice Wishart makes, if I've got my numbers correct in what she said, 9% of the UK's allocation comes into Shetland, and Scotland is getting 7.78% of the fund. So Shetland's contribution to fish landings exceeds the allocation to the whole of Scotland. So that beautifully makes my point about the inequity of this situation. So obviously, we'll engage constructively with Shetland Islands Council. I'm seeing the leader of Shetland Islands Council later on this afternoon, so I'm sure we might discuss this issue. But I can assure her that we will work collaboratively with the industry in Shetland. But the fundamental inequity is the UK Government's allocation, and that's the issue that has to be remedied.
Question number 5, Ross McCall.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to reports that Babcock in Fife have had to hire workers from overseas as a result of reduction in some college courses.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the latest data shows that there are already over 14,000 full-time equivalent college students on engineering courses in Scotland. We are working to support colleges to meet Scotland's future skill requirements and are investing £750 million in colleges in the current year.
Ross McCall.
First Minister, employers in Fife, such as Babcock, are crying out for investment in local skills to drive local growth and opportunity, but have seen college budgets cut by a staggering 20% over the past 5 years and apprenticeships sharply declining by as much as a third in the last decade. The truth is, this SNP government has categorically failed to maintain investment in the skills local employers need to fuel economic growth. A local college source all but confirmed that the capacity to provide many more courses exists, but simply cannot afford to offer them to students given the financial situation placed upon them by this government. And this year's funding allocation included a £1.3 million cut on top of 19.4% reduction over the last 3 years, with the principal of the college stating that the scale of the challenge is now precipitous. Does the First Minister accept that these reductions in skills investment are making it harder for young people in Scotland to access training and employment, and for our businesses to recruit the local workers that they need?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, there's a number of issues in that question. Let me confirm to Parliament that in 2024-25, over 25,000 people started a modern apprenticeship in Scotland, with 39,000 individuals in training at the end of Q4 24-25. In relation to college funding, the Scottish Funding Council allocations provide a 2.6% sector increase in teaching funding for 2025-26 compared to last year, and no college saw a reduction in teaching funding in 2025-26 compared to the previous year. In addition to that, the Government is, of course, supporting in the funding of the new Fife College in Dunfermline, which will be available to local people. And lastly, let me just make this point to Ros McCall, because I can hear I'm being heckled by Ros McCall and others. It is laughable for the Conservatives to come here and ask for more money for something if they won't vote for the government's budget. It's hypocrisy in action. We get it every year from the Conservatives, and I'm going to call it out every time the Conservatives ask for more money in this Parliament.
Thank you. I would remind members that it would be helpful if we could hear one another. I call Pam Duncan-Glancy as a supplementary question.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And the First Minister says there's been a 2.6% increase, but a 2.6% increase in 1 year does not undo a decade of underfunding to colleges in Scotland to the tune of 20%. And that means, as Colleges Scotland has said, fewer students able to access a world-class college education. So it's hardly a surprise then that we have a growing skills shortage, and firms like Babcock are recruiting hundreds of welders from overseas just to keep work on track. All the while, Presiding Officer, nearly 250,000 young people in Scotland don't have jobs. This government's choices are denying young people chances. So can I ask the First Minister, can't he see this? And why is he content to manage the decline of Scotland's colleges and deny Scotland's young people the opportunities they deserve in the process?
First Minister.
Well, we're quite simply not doing that, because the Government is allocating more funding to the college sector. We're investing in college infrastructure, and as I've just said to Ros McCall, we are just completing the investment in the new Dunfermline Learning Campus with premises for Fife College. So the Government will sustain our investment in the college sector. We understand its importance. We see the significance of college funding to support the delivery of skills within Scotland, and that's at the heart of the Government's budget, which again I would point out Pam Duncan-Glancy never voted for either.
Question number 6, Pauline McNeill.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's position is regarding the report of 200,000 public sector workers who are still waiting on their pension entitlement following the 2018 MacLeod judgment on pension discrimination.
First Minister.
So we recognise the MacLeod judgment affects the administration of pensions across the United Kingdom, who have extended their timelines to reflect the challenges of delivery. In Scotland, there are approximately 215,000 members of affected schemes administered by the Scottish Public Pensions Agency. We should note that the vast majority of these scheme members have not yet retired and will make their remedy choice on retirement. Of the 65,000 retired members affected, there are many who will already be getting the best value pension. For those who have a choice that enables a higher pension, they will receive any arrears, including interest, to be paid for by the United Kingdom Government. The Scottish Public Pensions Agency is working to ensure that all those who are awaiting the remedy receive it, with the bulk of statements delivered by the end of 2026.
Pauline McNeill.
This has been described by those affected as a national scandal, and it is. Public sector workers, including nurses, police officers, firefighters and local government workers, are still to receive pension funds amounting to tens of thousands. So 7 years on from the MacLeod judgment on pension discrimination, there are in fact 55,000 still waiting on pension remedy statements, and they must be received before any compensation is paid. In fact, some have died waiting for their pension remedy statements from the Scottish Public Pensions Agency, and it has broken at least 2 statutory deadlines, but tomorrow it will miss a 3rd deadline, and delays are now expected to run until 2027. But every year a deadline is missed is a cost to the taxpayer in interest payments of 8%. So does the First Minister agree with me that after 7 years it is unacceptable that the SPPA have not put this right? And given it's a government agency, I ask the First Minister what action is he prepared to take to bring forward the work required to issue remedy statements to pay public sector pensioners on time, and what further redress is he going to provide for those impacted by this debacle? And here I'm talking about those who have already retired on reduced pensions. At least you could agree there's an urgency here now.
First Minister.
I do agree with that point, and what I would provide as reassurance is that when the remedy letters are issued, they will give a choice that enables a higher pension, if a higher pension applies, that the individuals will receive any arrears, including interest, and that will be paid for by the United Kingdom Government. Now, and this is an issue that has implications for the UK Government. Now, this issue has been taken forward by the relevant Minister, Ivan McKee. I think colleagues know the assiduous way in which Mr McKee takes forward his responsibilities. That has involved increasing the workforce at the SPPA by more than 30% to help to ensure that the experienced staff that are necessary to calculate often complex recalculations of pension entitlement are able to do that. So I hope that gives Pauline McNeill some reassurance that the Government has actually increased the resources quite significantly of the SPPA to ensure that we can make timely progress on this issue.
Question number 7, Ash Regan.
To ask the First Minister for what reason the Scottish Government has reportedly abandoned key provisions of the Fireworks Act of 2022, including the proposed licensing system, as communities prepare for potential disorder during bonfire night.
First Minister.
So the majority of the Act has been implemented, including support for local authorities to implement fireworks control zones to tackle hotspots where disorder has been experienced. We've also introduced new offences for providing fireworks or pyrotechnics to children and using fireworks to attack emergency workers. The licensing system has been paused due to the cost of introducing it at present, but that will be kept under review. Anyone taking part in illegal activity or disorder can expect a robust response from Police Scotland, as demonstrated by the recent major seizures of fireworks.
Ash Regan.
Presiding Officer, this Parliament passed that law to protect both the public and our emergency services over 3 years ago, and 4 bonfire nights since this law was enacted. Constituents and emergency services that I worked with to bring this law remain at their wits' end. And with respect to the First Minister, I would say that firework control zones don't work without control on purchasing as well. Now, only the UK Government, of course, can ban fireworks. But this was one of the highest public responded consultations that this Parliament ever ran. And those communities on the front line, mine is one of them, This has become an annual bonfire night war zone in constituencies across Scotland, and I think that they deserve for Scotland to use all the powers that we have available to us to help them. These communities are now bracing for impact. Firefighters, police and paramedics are continuously putting themselves in harm's way to protect the public, and they deserve more than warm words. They deserve the delivery of the law. The licensing system is still undelivered, and vital fire stations like Marionville in my constituency are facing closure. Public trust, I believe, is on the line. So will the First Minister commit to looking again at implementing this law in full?
First Minister.
Sir, I want to reassure us, Regan, that a number of the central provisions of the law have been implemented already. A prohibition on providing or making available fireworks or pyrotechnic articles to children, a new statutory aggravation for court sentencing offenders where fireworks were used to attack emergency workers, the powers in relation to firework control zones, and new offences on possession of pyrotechnics in public places and at designated venues and events. So, very strong action has been taken place, but I come back to the point I made in my answer originally, that anyone taking part in illegal activity or disorder can expect a robust response from Police Scotland. That is what has taken place in the past, and I would expect that to be the case in the future.
Brief supplementary, Emma Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Animal welfare charities are raising concerns about the severe distress that fireworks cause to many animals. The Scottish Animal Welfare Commission has said the effect of the delay in implementing the licensing scheme will prolong the period of unacceptable risk to animal welfare. So will the Scottish Government consider any early implementation of licensing and restrictions on the days that fireworks can be used and sold to protect animals?
First Minister.
Well, these issues will be kept under review, as I said to Ash Regan, and the Minister for Victims and Community Safety has liaised with the Scottish Animal Welfare Commission on our work to mitigate against the impact of fireworks, including how noise affects animals.
Brief supplementary, Sharon Dowie.
Thank you. The Bail and Release from Custody Act 2023 remains only partially implemented. The Female Genital Mutilation Act 2020 is not implemented, and now the Fireworks and Pyrotechnics Act 2022 has been quietly paused. This is just the latest example of this government talking tough, passing legislation, then sneakily dropping it when it becomes inconvenient. So can I ask the First Minister, how can the public have confidence that the Victims' Bill will be fully implemented? And can the First Minister explain why the public, indeed why this Parliament, had to find out about this U-turn through the press instead of the Minister herself?
First Minister.
Well, I can assure Sharon Dowie that the Government will focus intently on implementing the Victims and Witnesses Bill. It's been legislated for in Parliament, and we're taking that forward as we take forward other pieces of legislation that are approved by Parliament.
We move to constituency and general supplementaries. Can I suggest that we are concise? I call Bill Kidd.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, last week it was revealed that a fragment of waste found near the decommissioned experimental nuclear power facility in Dunray in April was the most radioactive detected in the past 3 years. Despite these clear environmental warnings, UK Labour ministers are threatening to impose expensive, unsafe and unnecessary new nuclear sites in Scotland. Does the First Minister agree with me that Labour should see sense and abandon their nuclear obsession?
First Minister.
The Scottish Government has been consistent in its opposition to the development of nuclear energy within Scotland. We think Scotland has a golden opportunity to develop renewables, and we should concentrate on doing so.
Absolutely. Tess White.
Officer, Police Scotland have ordered a director of For Women Scotland to attend a police station to face vandalism charges over a complaint about a broken umbrella. If she doesn't attend, she could be banned from Holyrood, a parliament that's supposed to represent her too. And the optics, First Minister, of this for the Scottish Government are terrible. To many people, this looks like a threat to free speech and an attempt to silence criticism, silence women and intimidate this particular organisation. Who is protecting who here, First Minister? Does the First Minister agree the police should be focused on much more serious incidents than a broken umbrella? And does he think Susan Smith should receive an immediate apology?
First Minister.
President, so let me reassure Tess White that I believe in free speech and I think it should be protected at all times in our society. And secondly, I understand from media reports that, and also from the contents of Tess White's question, that this is an issue which actively involves Police Scotland, and it would be inappropriate of me to comment on a case that is under active engagement with Police Scotland. If I was to do that,
Hear the First Minister.
If I was to do that on a habitual basis, I think there'd be lots of members of Parliament complaining about me doing so.
Paul Swinney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Insurance giant Maiden Life has suddenly announced that it is withdrawing the family protection plan that thousands of Glaswegian credit union members have been paying since it started in 1999. This immoral and callous withdrawal of the plan is causing widespread distress to my constituents in Glasgow and across the country. So will the First Minister share my condemnation of Maiden Life's decision and make a direct representation to the Financial Conduct Authority, along with the Credit Union Working Group, to demand immediate redress for the thousands of elderly Scots who will now be left unable to cover the cost of their funeral plans?
First Minister.
I'm very sympathetic to the point that Mr Swinney puts to me, and I will ask the Finance Secretary to engage directly with him. Credit unions provide an essential foundation in our society for people, particularly for people who are on low incomes and with and low savings levels. So it's important that financial security is available to them. But I'll ask the Finance Secretary to engage with Mr Swinney and make the representations that he asked for.
Claire Haughey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I remind Chamber that I am employed as a bank nurse by NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. This week, this SNP government announced the largest investment in GP services in Scotland ever, with more than £500 million over the next 3 years to support recruitment. And latest NHS waiting list figures are showing long waits down for the 4th month in a row, whilst NHS activity is rising. These tangible results show what happens when you have an SNP Scottish Government delivering for Scotland's NHS. What steps is the SNP government...
Let's hear one another.
What steps is this SNP government taking to build on this programme?
Ms Haughey, sorry. It's just a matter of basic courtesy. Surely we can afford one another that most basic courtesy. Ms Haughey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. What steps is this SNP government taking to build on this progress, to boost capacity in our NHS and ensure that Scots continue to have access to the highest quality NHS services?
First Minister.
President, I'm very pleased that we are seeing a decrease in new outpatient waits longer than a year. I'm delighted that we are seeing the total waiting list for outpatients and inpatients and day case lists decreasing compared to the same month last year. I'm delighted that treatment time guarantee waits of over a year have decreased by 6% when compared to last month. And I'm also delighted that the Health Secretary has managed to reach agreement with the Scottish GP Committee, which will see general practice receive additional funding of more than £500 million over the next 3 years. And along with my commitment to deliver 15 walk-in GP clinics across Scotland, added to NHS lists that are falling, the Scottish people can look forward to a strong National Health Service under SNP leadership.
Thank you. Tim Eagle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister may or may not be aware of the Murray Firth Flow Park project being proposed off Finhorn and Nairn, which will be wet storage for offshore wind platforms. I've already met with fishermen who are deeply concerned, and I've got a public meeting on the 11th of November where hundreds of people are interested. I don't want the First Minister to tell me that he can't comment due to planning or licensing applications, but perhaps he can help me answer the age-old question in Scotland that his government are failing on. That is, how can I ensure that my communities that I represent are better heard and represented in the decision-making process?
First Minister.
Well, there's a full range of different opportunities for these issues to be properly and fully considered. Yeah. There's a huge amount of scrutiny is applied to applications of this type, with significant assessments that are required, particularly for environmental reasons. And obviously Mr Eagle will be familiar with all of these contents because they are part and parcel of statute, and there is opportunities for engagement on all of these questions.
And John Mason.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can the First Minister give us an update on the Sheku Bio inquiry, and can he assure us that we will not be spending another £50 million on it and it will be concluded timorously?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I very much regret the fact that Lord Bracadale felt it necessary to resign from chairing the Sheku Bio inquiry. I want to place on record my admiration and appreciation, and that of the Government, for the service that Lord Bracadale has given to this inquiry, which I think has been exemplary. But I respect and understand his decision to step down. The Deputy First Minister has thanked Lord Bracadale for his work and is now engaging about how to take forward the inquiry. We will keep Parliament updated on the steps that are necessary to do so. There is, as Mr Mason will know, we have statutory consultation that we have to undertake about the chairing of the inquiry, and that will be undertaken timorously, and we will keep Parliament advised of the steps that we take.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. Point of order, Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Within the past 12 hours, Police Scotland say they are reviewing a decision to issue Susan Smith of 4 Women Scotland with a police recorded warning. A warning that, if it's not accepted, would have led to a charge of criminality. Video evidence from a peaceful protest held outside this Parliament on the 4th of September, at which I spoke and my colleagues spoke, shows clearly that there is no evidence of criminality, i.e. vandalism towards an individual who played loud music to drown out the voices of women peacefully protesting and calling for the Scottish Government to adhere to the Supreme Court judgment on the biological sex. Presiding Officer, the public must be reassured of their democratic rights, and the freedom of speech is valued by this Parliament, the Scottish Government and Police Scotland. I ask what mechanisms there are to understand if Police Scotland have had conversations with ministers regarding this incident on the parliamentary estate, and also which led to it being reviewed. Finally, does the Presiding Officer believe that all protests are equal and deserve to be safely facilitated, or is it just ones that suit SNP ideology?
Thank you, Ms Hamilton. Ms Hamilton will be aware that the comments that the member has just put on the record are not, in fact, a point of order. The next item of business is a member's business debate in the name of Craig Hoy, and there will now be a short suspension to allow those leaving the chamber and the public gallery to do so.
Okay, if I could ask those leaving the public gallery to do so as quickly and as quietly as possible as we move on to the next item of business, which is a member's business debate on motion 19202 in the name of Craig Hoy on regretting bank closures. The debate will be concluded without any questions being put. I'd invite members wishing to participate to press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible. And I call Craig Hoy to open the debate up to 7 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The rate of bank closures Ingles is a concern to members across this chamber, and can I thank MSPs who supported the motion on a cross-party basis. As someone who believes in the free market, this is not territory into which I tread readily. Banks are commercial entities. I accept that. They are free to make their own commercial decisions. I recognise that. But they also have a duty to their customers, particularly older customers and small businesses who often live and operate in small towns and in rural areas, those who are not digitally minded or who are digitally disadvantaged, people and businesses who need to have a convenient place to carry out their banking needs. Since being elected, I have heard far too often from constituents who feel that high street banks have abandoned them. This list of closures in South Scotland is far from exhaustive. Bank of Scotland Annan, closing. TSB Pennacook, closed. Bank of Scotland Moffat, closing. Bank of Scotland Sanker, closed. Bank of Scotland Thornhill, closing. Bank of Scotland Duns, closed. Yorkshire Building Society Dumfries, closing. Bank of Scotland Dunbar, closed. Bank of Scotland Eyemouth, closed. Santander Hoyk, closed. Bank of Scotland Jedburgh, closed. TSB Hoyk, closed. Bank of Scotland Langham, closed. Bank of Scotland Newcastleton, closed. Barclays Ayr, closed. Bank of Scotland Castle Douglas, closing. Bank of Scotland Newton Stewart, closed. TSB Harrington, closed. Barclays Dumfries, closed. RBS Trinent, closed too. Bank of Scotland North Berwick, closed. Bank of Scotland Peebles, closed. TSB North Berwick, closed. Bank of Scotland Hoyk, closed. Bank of Scotland Selkirk, closed. TSB closed also. And in too many cases, these closures were the closure of the last bank in town. Now, I accept this is a complex issue and that these closures are taking place in a regulated sector where the operating environment is changing fast. But banks make a great virtue of their environmental, social and governance credentials. The S in ESG reflects their duty to society. They say they have a duty to support their customers and the communities they serve. But this is all too often ignored when banks leave our high streets and simply pass over the responsibility to Link and to Cash Access UK. The regulation of the banking and financial sector is reserved to Westminster, and I have been working with colleagues there on what needs to be done to reform how cash access assessments are determined. The current legislation and the current regulations are too blunt. They fully fail to take account of special circumstances. For example, towns that might have a high but seasonal... I will from Murdo Fraser, yes.
Very briefly, Murdo Fraser.
I'm grateful to Craig Hoy for giving way. The issues he outlines are reflected in Highland Perthshire, part of the area I represent, and many other parts of the country. And there is frustration that applications for banking hubs, which are a very valuable resource, are not being granted because of the very strict criteria being drawn. I've written to the FCA about this. Does he agree the FCA need to revise their rules around where a banking hub can be granted?
Craig Hoy.
I do agree with Mr Fraser, particularly in relation to rural areas where I think this problem is most acute. Yeah. And, for example, there are certain towns that have, for example, high but seasonal demand for cash, or who have particular demographics, and the current criteria does not reflect that. And this is definitely the case in Moffat in Dumfriesshire, where in less than 3 weeks' time the Bank of Scotland will close its doors for the last time. This leaves this vibrant tourist and retirement town without a bank, an easily accessible high street ATM or a banking hub. The community is rightly concerned, and I commend Evelyn Atkins, who is in the public gallery with her husband Brian today, for leading the community campaign against the branch closure. Evelyn first asked for my support when she came into the bar at the famous Star Hotel on a Saturday night, seeking signatures for her petition. And through her hard work and her tenacity, Evelyn secured over 3,000 signatures, and her petition was recently presented in the House of Commons by my colleague David Mundell MP. Moffat is a small town, but it has a very large number of visitors and several cash-only businesses. Evelyn spent her career in banking. She is someone who understands what community banking should look like. But despite the petition, several rallies, a public meeting held in conjunction with Age Scotland, and most recently a meeting with a representative from Bank of Scotland held here alongside Oliver Mundell, the Bank of Scotland has refused to change course. Link believes that an upgrade to the post office provision will be sufficient, but many local businesses and residents disagree, and they now face a 42-mile round trip to Dumfries to access a bricks and mortar branch. Presiding Officer, digital banks may work for some, banking hubs for others. Community bankers who visit communities, for example, once a fortnight, may be sufficient for some customers. But for many, a traditional bank, a traditional bricks-and-mortar high street bank, remains a lifeline, often one used in times of distress, such as when scams are occurring. The very sad thing, though, Deputy Presiding Officer, is that it doesn't have to be like this. I recently met with the teams at Virgin Money and Nationwide in Dumfries, who talked to me about their 2028 branch promise. As part of their merger agreement, every Nationwide and Virgin Money branch will stay open until at least 2028. Virgin Money also offers free accounts to community groups, a service that is now sadly being withdrawn by other banks who now charge for such accounts. But it is, and I make this point, not all bad news, and let me offer praise where it is due. Alongside David Mundell and Councillor Julie Perroni, I was recently contacted by the Peebles Community Trust after the closure of the Bank of Scotland branch in the town. They sought our support to acquire the building, and I'm pleased to confirm that this week they have been successful in their bid. This will let the Trust move its reuse hub there and create space for a future banking hub if Link determines that that would be necessary. So the bank closure is regrettable, but I welcome this legacy move by the bank. Deputy Presiding Officer, I believe that this debate will show that bank branches are a lifeline for many. And I hope that the Scottish Government will do everything that it can to persuade banks to remain visible on Scotland's high streets. But I want to close with a direct appeal to the Bank of Scotland in Moffat. This is a special case, and those who know the town understand its unique needs. The closure is imminent, but the decision is not irreversible. I recognise that banks need to be commercially viable, but they have a duty to look after the communities they represent. The pace of change is simply too fast for some. The rate of closures is too high. These customers have stood by their banks for decades. It is their savings that have allowed the banks to lend. It was public money that bailed out the banks in 2008. But sadly, for too many communities, it is those banks that are now bailing on them. Deputy Presiding Officer, I look forward to listening to colleagues in this debate from around the country. I just hope that bank bosses are listening too.
Thank you, Mr Hoy. Just to advise the Chamber, there's an awful lot of interest in participating in this debate. I am keen to ensure that every member gets a chance to speak and to get the full allocation of time. I'm also conscious that we are due to resume business at 2 o'clock and staff will need time to prepare the Chamber ahead of that. So I'm going to have to ask members to stick very rigidly to their time allocation. I call first Jamie Hepburn to be followed by Liam Kerr. Up to 4 minutes. Mr Hepburn.
Thank you very much, President Officer. Can I begin by thanking Craig Hoy for bringing forward this motion today. I very much agree with the premise that it lays out. I think the notion of a bank promise, as he lays out in his motion, is one that's very much worthy of consideration. I should say, thankfully, the Bank of Scotland branch in Cumbernauld is not one of the 13 that is set to close, but my area has been hit very hard by bank closures over a number of years, and indeed there cannot be any of us, or indeed very few of us, who will, at best, who will not have been impacted by these challenges. My own area has been hit hard, as I've mentioned. I'll come back to that in a moment. But to set the overall context, the Which magazine on the 29th of September actually set out the scale of the change we have seen over the last decade, since January 2015. Across the UK, banks and building societies have closed 6,561 branches at a rate of around 53 a month. That represents 66% of the branches that were open at the start of 2015. And in Scotland, it's been particularly acute. Scotland was, in fact, the first area of the UK to experience the loss of over half of its retail banks in that period of time. There has been 719 of the 1,041 branches now gone, and another 21 set to go. That's 740 branches closed, or closing 71% of the total number of retail banks we saw in place in January 2015. I don't want to overly politicise my comments today, Presiding Officer, because this is an opportunity primarily to set out what is a constituency concern, but it is also a matter of how banks are regulated. Regulation remains in the hands of the UK Government, and I would observe that it was Mr Hoy's party that was in government for almost the entire period of that last decade, although, of course, we see the trend continuing under the Labour government. I want to turn to the local angle, as I think most of us probably will, in the context of this debate. In 2017, we saw the closure of the Royal Bank of Scotland in Kilsyth. They should declare an interest as an account holder with the Royal Bank of Scotland. In 2020, we saw the closure of TSB in Kilsyth. That left Kilsyth a town of over 10,000 people without a single retail bank in its area. 2022, the Clydesdale Bank, I'm still sentimental, President Officer, I'm going to call it Clydesdale Bank rather than Virgin Money, closed its branch in Cumbernauld. Again, should declare an interest as an account holder there. 2024, we saw the closure of the Royal Bank of Scotland branch in Cumbernauld Town Centre, which followed an earlier closure of another branch in the town. And most recently, in 2025, we saw the closure of Santander in Cumbernauld as well. Indeed, I was just in discussion with a constituent recently who talked of moving their account from Clydesdale because it closed in the area to Santander, and now they've faced the loss of their local bank again. So it is, of course, as Mr Hoy said, I think it is particularly acute as a rural challenge, but it's not exclusively so. It's impacting urban Scotland as well. I want to focus on what might be an opportunity, though, and it's not often I agree with Murdo Fraser, who has left this place, but I am a supporter of the notion of banking hubs. I think they could serve as an opportunity to pick up where we've lost some of the... I don't think I've got time, Mr Carson. I think I've got to close my own, and I want to make this point. I think banking hubs can serve as an opportunity to replace the loss of retail banking on our high streets. I agree with him, though, that some of the regulation around that is too strict. It focuses on access to cash. And of course, retail banks offer much more than that. And I would very much like to see community banking hubs established in both Kilsyth and Cumbernauld, and that's something I'll continue to call for.
Thank you. I now call Liam Kerr to be followed by Davy Russell. Up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm very grateful to Craig Hoy for securing this debate, because bank closures is something we are all too familiar with in Aberdeen. The Lower Deeside area, a roughly 8-mile corridor between Anderson Drive and Petercooter, used to have 8 banks. It now has none. So all the communities in that 8-mile corridor, including Cults, Bealdside, Miltimber, Petercooter, are without a bank. Now imagine you're an older person with suspicions about the internet and phone banking, having seen all the fraud warnings. Someone who's wary of banking apps with their AI-driven help desk. One of the many businesses in this corridor who need to bank cash or withdraw a float. Or you just need to speak face-to-face with a staff member. Well, your nearest banks are at Bankery, which is a 35-minute bus ride from Bealdside, the midpoint of this 8-mile corridor, or Queen's Cross in Aberdeen, an hour-long trek involving 2 buses. Now, Craig Hoy's motion calls for Link to do all they can to maintain access, and rightly so. You see, Presiding Officer, Link is a not-for-profit operation whose role, amongst other things, is, quote, a public interest objective to protect access to cash across the country. One of its key roles, which is peppered through all its comms, is financial inclusion, to which end it runs a financial inclusion programme and supports the rollout of shared banking hubs in areas affected by bank branch closures. I really don't have time, Finn Carson, sorry. The banking hubs will be considered based on things like distance to nearest cash services and vulnerability and digital exclusion. So, is Link doing all it can to ensure the financial inclusion of Lower Deeside? No. Following an approach from Cults, Bealdside and Miltimber Community Council for a banking hub, which was rejected by Link, I got involved. I wrote to Link and I pointed out I speak to constituents every week at surgeries, in shops, on doorsteps, and they are telling me just how deeply they are affected by the loss of these local banking services. Many are elderly, isolated, living with mobility issues. They are frightened of the internet, they're distrustful of online banking and increasingly cut off from the financial services they once relied on. I had one woman in Cooter who told me she had to ask neighbours to withdraw cash for her because she can't manage these bus journeys. Another in Miltimber hasn't spoken to a bank employee in over a year and feels invisible. Now, I pointed out to Link that the response to the Community Council assessment was fundamentally flawed in scope, in its substance and indeed in its assertions. Link reviewed my correspondence, rejected my evidence and concluded that this is my final response. If you remain dissatisfied, you can refer the matter to the independent assessor, who actually only reviews the handling, not the decision. So Link has washed its hands. Well, Presiding Officer, I am dissatisfied, as are my constituents, because the decision is based on a fundamental misunderstanding, does nothing for financial inclusion and everything for abandoning my communities, and looks like a classic piece of decision-making by a body that has no base in, or indeed any knowledge of, the North East. So I recently set up a petition which would show the strength of local support. It has hundreds of local signatures already, and I've been contacted by local facilities like the churches and the Cults Library team offering to host a banking hub. So let me be blunt. Link, there is a big local petition coming your way with a reiteration of why your decision is so flawed and detail of some of the solutions that make it easy to get to yes. Because, Presiding Officer, it is deeply regrettable that Link has failed to deliver the banking hub which is so desperately needed. But I am sure that, having seen this debate today, received my petitions, reconsidered the arguments, they will choose to do the right thing by Lower Deeside and give us the banking hub we so desperately need.
Thank you. I now call Davy Russell to be followed by Tim Eagle, up to 4 minutes. Mr Russell.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And my sincere thanks to Craig Hoy for bringing this to the Chamber, because I 100% agree with every word he said. Amongst other towns across Scotland, Larkhall, in my own constituency, will be losing its High Street Bank to the detriment of thousands of constituents and hundreds of businesses. In my interactions with the Bank of Scotland and Link, they were basically extreme. I was disappointed in their lack of compassion and understanding, and I actually proved them that their assessment was wrong, but they just shrugged their shoulders. The biggest impact this will have on the most vulnerable in society, especially the elderly, who are most dependent on in-person services. Remember when the banks were on their knees, Bank of Scotland understood perfectly what they were. They were essential necessity to the people. When in 2008, we, the public, all of us here, contributed to the £17 billion bailout. In addition, further loans were guaranteed for billions from the UK Government. This was as a decision not to abandon them. But however, they've abandoned us. They're abandoning Scotland's high streets and semi-rural towns, putting shareholders and personal bonuses in front of long-standing customers. It's morally bankrupt. Clearly, the free rein that banks have enjoyed, being governed by the old boy network, has gone on for far too long, and their power has been abused, as the banks cannot be counted to act in the best interests of their customers or the economy. I wholeheartedly join the calls from this motion that banks should be compelled to keep existing branches open and serving the community that ultimately supported them when they were almost down and out. I also want to expose the fallacy that Link, their so-called independent assessor for these matters, are actually independent, because they're not. If you look at Bank of Scotland cards, it says Link on them. You know, they're just there to do. And the discussions I've had with them, they've basically, I'll need to get back to the bank, and we speak to the bank, they'll say, oh, we'll get back to Link. You know, so they're all part of the same gang. And they're just doing their bidding as instructed. The days of allowing banks to do as they wish shouldn't be tolerated. We should use the powers we have here in this Parliament. And what I mean is, any banking that us or local authorities do should be taken away from the banks that are doing this to our local communities. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Tim Eagle to be followed by Paul McLennan, up to 4 minutes. Mr Eagle.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and can I congratulate Craig Hoy for securing this debate. Local banks are often a hub for many people, especially in small, close-knit communities. They are part of the social fabric of rural communities that is sadly ebbing away. According to Link Group, since February 2022, 2,209 bank branches have closed across the UK, with around 233 of those in Scotland. In the Highlands and Islands region, there have been 40 closures in that time. time. The number of branches closing increased year upon year up to 2025, while numbers of closures have dropped this year. I suspect that's because there are barely any branches left to close. Even just a few months ago, it was announced that Lloyds Banking Group were closing 4 of their Bank of Scotland branches in Nairn, Dingwall, Gairloch and Tain. Communities are facing fewer and fewer banking options, and whilst I welcome the work that groups like Link and Cash Access UK do to step in when the big banks leave local communities, even then, many of my constituents feel that the solutions are not adequate enough. Since 2022, Link have recommended some 33 banking hubs to be established across Scotland, but just 3 of those are in the Highlands and Islands region. And when a hub has not been recommended, other lesser alternatives have been suggested, such as a new ATM, a new assisted cash service, and assisted counter services, such as the Cash Hub in Lossiemouth Town Hall. Again, only on 3 occasions have communities in my region benefited from some of those alternatives. Now, in fairness to Link, many of the impacted communities have local post offices, and I welcome the role they play in stepping to fill the void left by bank branch closures. But while post offices offer a range of services, they do not fully make up for the loss in expertise and enhanced services that disappear when a bank branch closes. One constituent contacted me about their Bank of Scotland branch closing in Dingwall. They told me that their local branch is a lifeline to many older people, and that Bank of Scotland make you feel like it is an offence nowadays to do your transactions using a cashier at a desk. While I welcome measures taken by some banks, such as Nationwide's pledge not to close any branches until at least 2028, and Barclays halting closures for 25 and 26, the sad truth is that more closures will come unless banks figure out ways to diversify their branch offering, be more involved in their communities to increase footfall. That may seem like wishful thinking, but it should not be impossible for major banks to do things differently, to do more to protect the local bank branch rather than just concede and shut up shop. Because this is more than just about bank branches closing. The closure of bank branches is one more reason for rural depopulation. The loss of such services in our small rural towns and villages is one more reason for people to leave and for people not to move in their place. We must do more to reverse this trend. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Paul McLennan to be followed by Rachel Hamilton. Up to 4 minutes. Mr McLennan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I thank Craig Hoy for bringing forward this debate this afternoon? As some may know, I started my career with the TSB in Harrington. Then, after a few years, moved to the Bank of Scotland at the bottom of Morningside Road. I spent 22 years in the banking sector, from financial advisor to business and corporate banking. At the time when I was in Morningside branch, there was around about 45 to 50 people working in the branch, from cash desk to business banking to customer inquiries. I remember Thursday afternoons, the afternoon rush with people coming in with paychecks and withdrawing cash. The rush around about Edinburgh Trades Holiday was very busy also. Now, that's enough reminiscing from the 1980s from me. Time, of course, has changed. Technology has changed dramatically, and footfall in branches has dropped. Morningside branch now has around about 6 to 8 members of staff compared to the 50 I mentioned previously. So what can we do to tackle bank closures? We can, of course, all campaign, and we've heard from many members today talking about that, to save bank branches. Sometimes the last in town. East Lothian, as it's been mentioned, has seen bank closures in all of its towns from all of the banks. In October last year, I and my team contacted Link around about bank closures in Dunbar, North Berwick and in Tranent. Link's the coordination body that conducts assessments when there is a change to level of cash access in the community and recommends new services when required. They, of course, assess bank closures in the towns and villages. New rules were brought in around about October last year. I was extremely pleased then, when we submitted the applications for North Berwick, Dunbar and Harrington, that the new banking hub was recommended for North Berwick and in Dunbar. And we continue to push for Tranent. Cash Access UK were asked to take forward the proposals. Public meetings were held in North Berwick, which Mr Hoy and myself both attended, where members of the public attended and were able to ask questions. Now, I'm delighted to say that the banking hubs are now open in North Berwick and in Dunbar. North Berwick is in the old Bank of Scotland building. Very briefly,
Craig Hoy, briefly.
I agree with Paul McLennan in respect of welcoming the banking hubs to Dunbar and North Berwick. But, sorry, does he share my concern that those banking hubs are not being fully utilised, and therefore, on 2 of the days that I last visited the Dunbar hub, there was no community banking facility within it? So will he join me in encouraging banks to take up the use and capacity in banking hubs?
Paul McLean.
Yeah, like Mr Hoy, I visited the branches as well, and that was issue was raised. I think it's good now to see that the hub in Dunbar is now moving to a permanent home, and I think there'll be more representation from the banks is there. So the permanent home in Dunbar will be open in the next few weeks. It's a regenerating a building that hadn't been used for a number of years. So business banking hubs obviously help our business communities, and when we were at the North Berwick meeting, there was lots of businesses there that were welcoming that. It also mentions and it supports people who suffer from digital exclusion and provides key support for our communities. Let's all campaign against bank closures when we can, but let's also campaign for the banking hubs and the support they bring to our communities. Now, one obvious solution, of course, is to bring banking regulation to Scotland under independence, and we can get to make decisions that affect our own communities. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I now call Rachel Hamilton to be followed by Kenneth Gibson. Up to 4 minutes. Ms Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And may I thank my colleague Craig Hoy for bringing forward this very important debate today on bank closures. Since 2012, 6,000 bank branches have closed across the United Kingdom, and the most recent sad casualty is the Bank of Scotland in Hoyg, and that's a severe blow to customers who have expressed such shock and disappointment. A banking hub is proposed, and I welcome that, but if it works, then it's going to be great. But I've heard constituents saying that they're concerned about the privacy of a banking hub, and that's especially worrying for older customers in the current climate where we're seeing scams and fraudulent activity. So no wonder they are very worried. My colleague Liam Kerr spoke about a constituent who asked a neighbour to withdraw cash for her. Now, I find this incredibly concerning, but it's not alone. She's not alone. And I had a constituent to whom I spoke to on the doorstep who told me, well, she was partially sighted and that she had given her banking card to a friend, a trusted friend, who took it to Berwick to get cash because there was no cash left at the local ATM at the Co-op in Eyemouth. And I find that incredibly worrying. The closure in Hoyg marks the 8th bank branch closure in the borders since 2022, following closures, as my colleague Craig Hoy has read out, in Eyemouth, Selkirk, Jedburgh and Duns. And the combining factor of all these places is that they are small rural towns, and the closures have affected those who are the most vulnerable, and it's including nearly half of over 65-year-olds who still rely on a physical banking service. And with the demise of our high streets, I think the Minister should be concerned about the closures, because it's an ever-decreasing circle, because retailers and tourism businesses are closing too. And having the lack of access to cash doesn't help them, because small retailers still rely on cash, and people use cash because they want to be able to budget. Now, I agree with my colleague Craig Hoy about the limitations of the Financial Conduct Authority. I met with the Financial Conduct Authority in London, and clearly, as we've all agreed today, that many of the solutions are reserved. However, we must look towards asking the Labour government to give more powers to the FCA so that they can protect cash access in rural areas by referring or reforming the access criteria to a more practical look at the rural challenges that they face. Many of the problems lie in the assessment process of the distance threshold, for example, for transport links and accessibility. Predominantly, urban areas are assessed for the relevant distances within a mile, where at least 95% of people live. But we all know that this is not how rural towns operate. Rural towns are facing challenges because commercial bus companies cannot operate viably, and so they're withdrawing services, which means the threshold doesn't or isn't relevant. And I want to pay at this point tribute to a wonderful retired school teacher from Eyemouth called Margaret Kerry, and she has campaigned vigorously to get access to cash in Eyemouth. I also think that communities must be empowered to have a realistic chance
of making their case about rural challenges when appealing decisions. Because, Presiding Officer, it is extraordinary that communities are not consulted prior to decisions to close banking services. I will continue to campaign to keep access to cash alive and to keep banks on the high street. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Hamilton. And I call Kenneth Gibson to be followed by Jamie Halker-Johnson. Up to 4 minutes. Mr Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I congratulate Craig Hoy for securing a debate on an important matter which is unfortunately affecting a growing number of my constituents. Saltcoats has been left with only one bank branch providing in-person banking services after the closure of Santander's Chapel Street branch on 21st of July. This is made worse by the fact that Saltcoats Post Office, also on Chapel Street, remains under threat, a facility banks often point to for basic banking facilities when they close branches. Large, a town of over 11,000 inhabitants with a sizable number of tourists and day trippers, will be left with no bank at all when Bank of Scotland shuts its Main Street premises in March. The loss will be keenly felt by residents and local businesses and follows RBS, TSB and Clydesdale Bank closures. Like colleagues, whenever bank closures are imposed on my constituents, I contact bank executives urging them to reconsider, as I suspect have many members when their constituencies were affected, always to no avail. The new assisted cash facility recommended for Largs is welcome, but it's certainly not a substitute for bank branches that enable customer access to friendly, face-to-face services and advice 5 or 6 days a week. According to Bank of Scotland's own figures, one-third of their large customers rely on face-to-face banking services, and while I don't deny the future of banking will be increasingly online, pushed by the banks themselves, of course, many, mostly elderly and vulnerable customers simply don't feel comfortable using online banking, especially given the prevalence of scams and cybercrime. In fact, a Newcastle Building Society study found that half of people aged 27 to 42 would also rather visit the local bank branch, if such a thing existed, to speak face-to-face than managing all their personal finances online. Myriad constituents have been in touch to say the decline of face-to-face banking is being portrayed as customer choice, when in fact it reflects the bank's own efforts to steer customers toward digital services. In Saltcoats, they said it was lack of footfall, but I don't recall a time when I went to Saltcoats, Clydesdale Bank as it was, when there wasn't a half-hour queue to get served. So I think the footfall argument is often nonsense. In the rush towards digital-only services, it is increasingly clear that communities like Largs, Saltcoats and the Garnet Valley, where 7 branches were extant a year ago, are being left behind by the banks, and the Labour Party strong on rhetoric in opposition, but abysmal on delivery in government. One of Labour's 20 pledges to businesses was to stop bank branch closures, where their plan for financial services stated that they will, and I quote, accelerate the rollout of at least 350 banking hubs which help people have free access to cash and wider banking services. As of today, I have yet to see a single banking hub open in my constituency, and it's not for the want of trying. When I contacted Link to request a banking hub for Lags, I was told that because only 8,996 adults live near the High Street rather than an arbitrary figure of 10,000, they don't recommend a hub. Link's remit, regulated by the UK Government's Financial Conduct Authority, is limited to assessing access to cash, not wider banking services. The lack of a bank on the neighbouring island of Cumbria was not taken into consideration either. Frustratingly, powers over banking have never been devolved to the Scottish Parliament. During the passage of UK Financial Services and Markets Act 2023, Labour MPs tabled new clauses enabling the FCA to ensure access to banking services. But the UK Conservative Government did not support the clauses, and the litany of bank closures read out by Craig Hoy transpired primarily when the Tories were in office. And after nearly 16 months of a UK Labour government, Scotland sees more and more bank branches close their doors forever. Presiding Officer, people are seeing their high street bank branches disappear at an alarming rate, just as they do with their post offices. While there is no silver bullet to reverse this trend, I urge Scottish ministers to lobby Link and the UK Government to change the arbitrary population thresholds and finally extend the FCA's powers to include access to wider banking services. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Jamie Halker-Johnson to be followed by Megan Gallagher. Up to 4 minutes. Mr. Halker.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I congratulate Craig Hoy on bringing this debate to Parliament, given the recent closures from Bank of Scotland. Like his region, mine is affected by these closures, and like his region, the closure of branches will cause real challenges for the many people whose local bank branch is increasingly far away and not so local anymore. The south of Scotland and the Highlands share more similarities than is often recognised. They both contain networks of smaller towns, many distant from one another, and still acting as true commercial centres for their surrounding areas. And they are places where small businesses are the lifeblood of our local economies. But the reality is that our lower population densities often mean that we're the first to lose out when services are centralised. While in many ways progress through technology has reduced at least some of the challenges of rurality, it's also created conditions which have allowed these communities to be left even more isolated than before. It was only last year when I spoke in a previous members' debate called by Rhoda Grant on the reduction of mobile banking services across the Highlands and Islands. And as I mentioned then, I had previously participated in Dean Lockhart's members' debate on the removal of cash machines, and I was a member of the Economy Committee inquiry into bank closures in 2018. And my concern is that we often focus on the alternatives, ATMs, online banking, mobile branches. We then find ourselves debating the loss of that alternative at some point further down the line, and that simply isn't good enough. Both the Scottish and UK governments have spoken of the importance of high streets and town centres, not only as spaces for retail, but as focal points for community, places to access public services and spaces to enjoy meeting each other. But this further round of closures, coming after so many previous losses, demonstrates the hollowing out of these places continues at pace. I recognise that high streets and town centres will change and adapt in response to consumer needs. And this cannot be a wholly one-sided appeal to preserve these areas in time. But increasingly, consumer needs, particularly those of our older residents, as Craig Hoy highlighted, are simply not being catered for in regions like mine. I welcome the action to promote and increase the number of banking hubs by Cash Access UK with the cooperation of the major banks and the Post Office. 2 such hubs now exist in my region, in Forres, and only since this summer a new hub in Wick. Both have been well received, even if it's clear that some remain... I'll just finish this point. Even if it's clear that some remain unaware of the breadth of services that they offer, we must watch closely to see if they become a truly viable and sustainable alternative and are able to grow at the pace suggested. And I, for one, would like to see more across my region. I'll take the intervention.
Finlay Carson.
I appreciate you giving way. Just want to put on record that thanks to campaigners and have been successful and opened the banking hub in Kirkcudbright and in Newton Stewart in the last 12 months. However, we know that Link were asked to review how they assessed these banking hubs, but that still needs to be firmed up. Would you join with me to ensure that FCA look at mandatory review of access to cash in towns where, before the last bank closes, to make sure towns like Dalbeattie, the biggest town in the Stewartry, who's been without a bank or a banking hub for some time, is reviewed again. And I have been successful in the last month getting Dalbeattie and Wigton being reviewed, and we need that to be a process.
Jamie Halker-Johnson, I can give you some of that time back.
Thank you very much, and that's very generous of you, Presiding Officer. I certainly would agree, and I think certainly from the response that I got on these benches, that is more widely felt. Just as significant is the Post Office network, which provides basic banking services in its branches, and even when sub-post offices close, pop-up branches, like the one that I was in only last Thursday, and which serves my home parish of Orford in Orkney, continue to play an important role. In part, post offices have been protected across the UK by their access criteria, alongside a great deal of political will and continued commercial interests. In many situations, it is only after these local services are lost, though, that we appreciate their true value. The chief function of a face-to-face bank or post office branch may be to process transactions or do business, but how many banks have spotted customers being subject to identity fraud or scams? How many have been first to notice other financial crimes, such as undue influence, being exerted on a vulnerable person? How many play or have played an important social role in communities like those across my region? Access to cash is not and cannot be our only concern. Deputy Presiding Officer, while the world is changing, there remains a need for face-to-face banking services. If not bank branches in every village, then at least somewhere people can reasonably access cash when needed.
Thank you. And I call the final speaker in the open debate, Megan Gallagher, up to 4 minutes, please.
I'm very grateful, Presiding Officer, and may I also congratulate Craig Hoy for securing this important debate this afternoon on bank closures. Banks are more than just a building. They are the focal point of our communities. It's where local businesses deposit their takings, where elderly residents manage their finances in person, where people can ask advice or seek reassurance without resorting to an app or waiting in a frustrating telephone queue. FMQ. In my own region of Central Scotland, Bank of Scotland have announced the closures of branches in Bellshill, Larkhall and Grangemouth, and I will declare an interest at this point, Presiding Officer, as I am a Bank of Scotland account holder but also a customer of the Bellshill branch. It is the perception of local people that banks are deciding on their behalf how customers should bank, and this is simply not acceptable. There are petitions underway across the region to an attempt to save these banks from closure in January 2026, and I do urge residents in affected areas to look at the petitions, to make their voices heard by signing and to oppose these bank closures. Last Monday, I joined Councillor Richard Nelson, who organised a public meeting in the Larkhall area to talk about how the community can work together to stop this closure. Banking hubs were of course mentioned, but it won't be a surprise to any member in this chamber this afternoon that again a banking hub for Larkhall has also been refused. I felt that the public meeting was very productive, and the petition, who has been started by Councillor Richard Nelson, has already attracted over 500 signatures, and if Davy Russell would be so kind to sign that petition and share that petition, then we can work cross-party to stop the closure of the Bank of Scotland in Larkhall. But I think this shows the level of interest shown by local people to stop the expansion of bank deserts across Lanarkshire and other areas. One petitioner who signed the petition has publicly commented, stating, "As a pensioner with a husband who has dementia, it is difficult enough to deal with daily life without having to travel further afield to use a bank or lift money. I live in Stonehouse and have to travel to Larkhall to use a bank, and now you're going to close it. I and my husband have banked with you for over 65 years, and I hope you will reconsider and keep this branch open, or better still, give us a banking hub in Stonehouse." Well, I think that that petitioner is absolutely bang on the money with the points that she's raised within her own statement. But another interesting point that was raised during the public meeting was the semi-rurality of some of the residents in Lanarkshire when trying to use public transport to reach the next nearest town where a bank has not been earmarked for closure. Only 32% of households in Ashgill and Netherburn and 45% in central Larkhall are within a 10-minute walk of high-frequency public transport. Therefore, closing the Larkhall branch will therefore increase travel barriers for people. It is my view that little to no impact assessments have been carried out regarding deprivation, digital exclusion or proximity to the nearest local branch. Councillor Nelson has since written to Lloyds Banking Group asking for this decision to be reviewed. I back his calls and will continue to work with him and the local community to overturn this decision. On the bank closure in Bellshill, very briefly, Lanarkshire law, estate agents and solicitors have picked up the mantle and started a petition which again has attracted well over 500 signatures. And I would like to put on the record my thanks to them for the work that they are doing on behalf of the Bellshill community. Presiding Officer, if I may close on this point, banking groups will lose custom if they continue to close branches in areas, as people have had enough of being forced to go digital by going cashless. That's why I back the calls raised today by my colleague Craig Hoy that seeks to raise the issue of bank closures, but also investigating solutions to ensure that Scotland does not become a banking desert. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Gallagher. I now invite Richard Lockhead to respond to the debate. Minister, around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, and I begin by paying tribute to Craig Hoy for securing this debate on high street banks in Scotland and the rate of closures and some of the issues that arises. And clearly, the concerns he outlined are very familiar to many members around the constituency, particularly those of us in more rural constituencies, such as myself, representing Murray. And I remember there was a report a few years ago saying that Murray was the hardest hit constituency in terms of bank closures. And whilst we now have a banking hub in Forres and a cash hub in Lossiemouth, we only have one high street bank left outside of Elgin, and that's in Keith. So I also want to associate my tribute, the tribute was made by Craig Hoy to Virgin Money, because it's their bank branch, it's in Keith. And I met Alison Moffat and Adam Feach there and their great team just in the last couple of weeks, and learnt about their banking promise, of course, which was outlined not to keep the branch open to no early 2028, but also all the various services they're delivering there to support customers with dementia, to issue SIM cards to people who are unable to have connectivity, to help people who have an experience of domestic abuse, and other services as well, like working with local schools on entrepreneurial and banking and financial skills as well. So it's really tremendous work they're carrying out, and a really good example, as others have said, for other high street banks to follow. So I certainly share the concerns expressed by many members, and Jamie Hepburn, of course, outlined some of the stark statistics about the rate of bank closures in Scotland in recent years as well. So, while the regulation of financial services is, of course, a reserved matter, the Scottish Government has been proactive in our engagements with the sector and the regulator to advocate Scotland's interests. This is an issue that's been debated and raised in this chamber many times before. As a government, we very much welcome the FCA's new regulatory powers for access to cash, which came into force back in 2024. Ahead of these rules being implemented, the Scottish Government provided feedback during the consultation process at that time. That helped lead the FCA to amend its definitions of urban and rural in terms of the Scottish context, also recognising our unique geography and the challenges faced in particular by rural communities and island communities that others again have mentioned. So we've also taken some practical steps. This time last year, I convened a cross-party roundtable on access to cash and banking services that also brought together the FCA, Link, Cash Access UK and the Post Office, as well as members from across the parties in this chamber, which helped us all get a shared understanding of the new rules that were happening at that time. And under these new FCA rules, anyone concerned about access to cash in their area can make a cash access request to Link. There's also a right to appeal following an assessment decision. Of course, there are important safeguards, and I encourage individuals and community representatives to exercise their rights. And it's great to hear about the examples from around the country where people have attempted to use that process. I will come back to some of the concerns that have led to some of the rejections of those requests as well. But the expansion of banking hubs across Scotland has been positively received by those communities that have benefited. We've got a total of 16 hubs already and another 13 in progress. They, of course, bring together multiple banks under one roof and provide communities with access to essential banking facilities, allowing customers to carry out everyday transactions and speak to representatives from their own banks on dedicated days. Now, of course, I remember a statistic back in 2022 saying that only 14% of transactions nowadays involve cash. So the world is changing. But as members have said, we need safeguards, and I think many members have eloquently outlined the concerns faced by vulnerable communities, particularly elderly people, as well as certain parts of the economy, small businesses and more rural communities in particular. So high street banking still has a role to play, and some of these safeguards that we're talking about today, of course, are crucially important as well.
I thank the Minister for taking the intervention. The closure of a bank actually removes the reason to visit a town in many respects. So will he make sure, as the Scottish Government prepares for next year's budget, that the Government does nothing further that could impede our high streets?
Minister.
Well, I could have a separate debate on the future of high streets in Scotland. Clearly, we have had the Small Business Bonus Scheme in place for a number of years now, which is incredibly valuable to small businesses in our high streets. Many streets in our more rural high streets and smaller villages and smaller communities, virtually no local businesses pay rates. So that's a very valuable instrument, and of course it's been in place for many years now and plays a big role. There's been a number of other activities in relation to these ongoing concerns over the criteria for securing a banking hub, and many members mentioned where that has been refused in the past as well. I just want to say that the Scottish Government attended a FCA-convened forum on access to cash this month, where we were able to raise some Scottish-specific concerns about how our communities are being impacted directly, and these were raised with the FCA, Link and Cash Access UK at that forum. We articulated a number of those issues and also gave some case studies based on the insights gained from lots of different sources, including Citizens Advice Scotland, which highlighted Scotland's particular rural geography, topography, demographics compared to the rest of the UK. So it's always been our objective to make sure these specific Scottish concerns are taken into account.
Rachel Hamilton.
I thank Richard Lockhead for taking the intervention. In that meeting, were the concerns around the demise or the withdrawal of public transport in rural areas, because that is taken into account. Was that taken into account in that meeting?
Minister,
there was a range of concerns expressed by the Scottish Government at that meeting, such as the methodology used by Link to assess a community and decisions about the banking hubs. The frequency, duration and distance of public transport, yes, was raised, and the availability of that transport in communities. So rest assured that was raised at that meeting as well. So the FCA now is having a post-implementation review of a lot of these issues we're talking about today. And for clarity, that's not me on the screen there, but I want to just assure the Chamber that in that post-implementation review and following that forum, the Scottish Government will continue to make the strongest representations to the authorities to ensure that our concerns are taken into account. And the final point I would make is in terms of digital inclusion, a lot of measures are also underway in Scotland. We launched 2 new funds to support digital inclusion work in Scotland just this month, to the tune of over £1.4 million, which is now available. And the Connecting Scotland Digital Inclusion Fund and a CivTech Challenge combined UK Government and Scottish Government funding to support digital inclusion projects in Scotland. So the whole issue around digital inclusion is not divorced from this issue around the loss of high street banks, and it's important that we take measures to ensure that people are not left behind and are able to access banking services through digital means if they're unable to access that through a high street bank. So, Deputy Presiding Officer, just to assure the Chamber, this is a very topical issue. I'd urge all members to pay attention to this post-implementation review being carried out by the FCA so we can ensure that Scotland's voice is heard.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the debate. I suspend this meeting of Parliament until 2 p.m.